from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word, and another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. Today is Friday, July 12th, 2019. Do you know what that is? On God's calendar. I'm going to tell you about that in just a second. Got a real special program for you today. We're going to begin with freaky weather. That's actually the headlines. When I went on the internet to talk about some of the weather of information people were sending to me, it came up, freaky weather. So that's what we're talking about today. Freaky weather, hail, hurricanes, and earthquakes. Then we're going to talk about in a special focus, EU elections. The news isn't even hardly covering what the EU elections is. It's probably, for us, God's people, one of the most important things we need to pay attention to as we get into end-time prophecy. So we're going to talk about the EU elections and Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And we've got a real special video for you there coming up too. Tammuz 9. And that's what today is on Friday, Tammuz 9. We're going to talk about that in relation to coming calamities and events that have taken place in the past on Tammuz. But let's begin with this. The Betsy Ross sneaker debacle. What a mess that has been going on about this. A new symbol of offense. It's absolutely horrendous how in America that you can take something as simple as an American flag with the 13 stars and relate it to, you ready? A Nazi SWAT sticker and also the KKK and the burning of the flag. Unbelievable how people have taken and transposed what was originally intended for the foundation of this nation, 13th being the 13th colony of Israel, a modern-day Israel, and the 13 states. So anyway, what's going on with that? The offensive sneaker. Nike cancels potentially offensive Betsy Ross Air Max release after Colin Kaepernick steps in. You know, I watched this story. I watched when Colin Kaepernick last year when they brought him in. You would think because of what took place that their stocks would lose money, but they didn't. They gained money. Last week when this story came out, while it had all the bad press for Nike, their stock went up again. Something's going on here underneath where God says we don't fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities. So it seems as if, now you tell me, write in, let me know, but it seems like anything that will begin to destroy God brings greater presence in America and greater abundance, because that's what's taking place here again. This is from Reuters. Arizona's governor on Tuesday withdrew a $1 million incentive for Nike to build a plant in his state where the world's largest sportswear maker canceled release of a sneaker featuring colonial-era version of the American flag, which critics say links to slavery. I understood that slavery was at the time. This flag does not represent slavery. It actually represents freedom from that. Betsy Ross flag equivalent to. This is an MSNBC guest compared the Betsy Ross American flag to the Nazi SWAT sticker and the KKK cross. The guest, Michael Dyson, author and Georgetown professor. Now let's stop for a second here. This is a professor who's teaching the students. Have you wondered why our nation continues to degenerate into where there is no more joy or pride in the nation itself, but it seems like everything we do is just has to be apologized for? Well, this is part of the reason why. Nearly all professors now at the universities across the country, except for some of the private universities, all push the left-wing liberal agenda, which is anti-American in nearly every single case. So here he said this. The professor compared the Betsy Ross flag to the Nazi SWAT sticker and the Ku Klux Klan burning of the cross. He went on to say, why don't we just wear the SWAT sticker for the 4th? Amazing. No kickback, no problems with anybody watching that channel. In fact, probably people sitting in their living room stood up and applauded to hear this kind of nonsense. But that's what's going on with the nation. And they won't realize how much they have destroyed the integrity of what God has built in this nation till it's too late. And God warns. He said that eventually they will cry out. When the nation's destroyed, they will cry out to God for help. And he says, I will not answer. Those are things you need to take note of what's going on here. All right, so now let's talk about the weather. You see how that in the picture there? What's going on here? This is down in Mexico. Record hail in Mexico. Imagine 3 to 5 feet of hail in Mexico. You always think it's kind of hot down there. 3 to 5 inches. This came out on June 30th. All right, Guadalajara, Mexico. There's all the kids out in Mexico playing in, look like the snow of all places down in Mexico. Photo shows the freak summer hailstorm coating roads with 5 feet of ice in Guadalajara, Mexico. The capital of Jalisco in southwestern Mexico experienced a freak hailstorm on Sunday. In some neighborhoods, roads were blanketed with up to 5 feet of ice. Dozens of vehicles were swept away and homes were damaged, but there have been no reports of injuries or deaths, which is amazing. No deaths, no injuries. So instead of me just telling you the whole story, I thought I'd just bring you in a couple of pictures. Take a look at this. They're digging out from, look at these trucks, digging out from all this ice. Here in the middle part of town, as the ice grew, it just swept away vehicles. There's a police officer just walking down the street on top of 3 to 5 feet of ice, walking down the middle of town. Here we have the military helping to try to dig out the walkways, the sidewalks, to get to the streets, to the businesses. And here you see we had all these cars were pushed as the ice moved down the middle of town, actually pushed all these vehicles. Now, if I was showing you this, it was up in North Dakota, Alaska, or Canada, fine. But this is down in Mexico. I've never seen anything like it, and I thought maybe we ought to bring that to you in light of all the news we've been talking about with the weather for this year and what's been taking place. So now let's talk a little more about weather. Earthquakes, conditions of what's taking place in Southern California. As you probably heard already, they had 2 major earthquakes on July 4th weekend. All of these things, the weather, the climate, earthquakes, as God says in His Bible, in diverse places or different places, all of these things are lining up to where God says that all creation groans in travail for the return of Jesus Christ. And that's what you're looking at right here. You're beginning to see a lot of these events happening more often and more frequent in different places that you hadn't seen them before, like 5 feet of ice down in Mexico. So after the 2 major earthquakes, thousands of aftershocks. I was watching a weather report yesterday that there's a real small town outside of the main part of the California, it looked like it's almost in the middle of a desert. It looks like they may have to just tear down almost all the buildings because it shook so bad that all the foundations, the buildings are cracked, the filling stations, and most of these people don't have any earthquake insurance. Like here in New Orleans and down in Florida, they have to carry wind and hail. In other words, you can have home insurance, but if a hurricane comes in down here, that doesn't help you. Evidently, they've got the same kind of thing in California, that you can have home insurance, but if you don't carry something special for earthquakes, then you don't get covered. So most of these people, they don't have homes because they don't have earthquake insurance. Unless the government steps in, they're not going to have places to live. And there'll be a good part of a town pretty much gone because of this. And these are just the beginning of woes. And they're talking about some of the big ones coming down the road. How soon, they don't quite know, but they're coming because the Bible says they will come. So we keep an eye on that. I want to bring that out to you and bring it out in Southern California here. This was the 7.1 magnitude. They hadn't had anything this large in about 20 years. And that gives you the size of the ring of where they're going through, almost in the center of where it took place. But it went as far as Las Vegas and almost as far down as Los Angeles. So it covered a lot of ground. And these after tremors have created a lot of problems. So there was fires. So anyway, this is, you need to put these things on your radar. Wouldn't be a bad idea to start keeping track of everything in like a board or something to see what's going on. Kind of help keep aware of what's taking place. Now, we're going into hurricane season. All right, so we had the ice in Mexico, the hurricanes. Of course, we've been covering the flooding and the freezes in the Midwest. And there's no telling what food's going to be costing this year, later this year into next year, because a lot of those farmers can't grow this year. So all that's going to take place, and now we move into hurricane season. So hurricane season now, we got a new tropical development. Now I know this is earlier in the year, and this may not cause a lot of problems, but they're already lining up. Now I'm showing you something here. We got a little video in just a couple minutes. The video I got it on a Monday. We're taping today on Tuesday. So I looked at the story from Monday to Tuesday, And now they're talking about massive amounts of rain potential down in the Gulf and along the southern states into to Louisiana into Texas again. And so this has come from a new tropical area, which is I wanted to bring in because it's not your norm. It's actually coming from the middle of the states up in Georgia. This time, this tropical development is not coming off the coast of Africa or down in the Gulf or even in the Atlantic. It's coming from the middle of Georgia, and they're going to be moving down a low pressure system, and it's going to create a low pressure system. They said it's got the potential to even become a hurricane, depending on how long it sits out there. So I've got a map, and this is what they're just showing where it's going to be coming from in just a few days. So by the time you get this program on Friday, it should be in the Gulf into its development stage. But I wanted to bring this to you to let you know that we are trying to pay attention to this. But watch how this works. We have a video on it with the Weather Channel. So let's go ahead and play that.
Well, here we are in July. When we look back between 1851 and last year, 2018, these are all dots that represent storms and where they formed. There's been a lot of them in the month of July, right? Well, you break it down a bit and you look at these storms that ended up being Category 1 or Category 2, highlighted now in the white. A lot more closer to home when you see that. Southeast coast here for us, around the Bahamas, a few in the Caribbean, and certainly a number in the Gulf of Mexico. We'll break it down even further. Major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher, there's a little bit fewer of those. Those are the ones indicated by the red icons, not as many. So we don't see too many in the month of July becoming major hurricanes. But it can happen, as you see. It has happened here in the history books. Well, here's what's going on and what we're watching pretty closely. Bit of a disturbance now, and the computer model's picking up on this. Here's the European model's depiction of sort of the area of spin associated with it. That will be diving into the Gulf of Mexico here as we head on through the mid part of the week. Sort of hang around here, and as it does so, that's when it may start to take on tropical characteristics here for us. And then one of the reasons that's sort of working for development is, well, the water temperatures. They're pretty warm. They're plenty warm for tropical cyclone development. We're talking water temps in the mid to even upper 80s in that area. Above average for sure when you talk about compared to average here across that Gulf water region. This is also an area where the wind shear, the strong winds in the upper levels, they're not very fast. Sort of a hole here where things are light. And of course, tropical cyclones, as they're trying to get going, they don't like strong winds in the upper levels. So that's going to be an area where it's a little bit more favorable for it to develop. So current thinking is, and according to the models, that we will see something forming and then moving on off towards the north and the west, according to the European, maybe making some impacts there to the eastern parts of Texas, western Louisiana. We'll keep an eye on that.
When you take a look at that, you might want to back up the video when you get a chance to and look at where everything began. That was a chart there that they put together that was probably 167, 168 years, I think it was. And as I looked at that, there was actually only one time that it actually formed inside the states and came out. There's other times that went right around the coastline, but only once. So this may be the only second time in 167 or 168 years that an event like this has taken place. Absolutely rare. So what we're looking at is the rarity of weather that's continuing to develop over the course of the last few years, especially since 2015, where the environment and the damages have doubled what they had been in previous years before 2000. So I want to bring that to your attention. And one more thing I want to bring out is that you don't realize the temperature, how hot it is. When I used to take diving students, when I take my classes out, we'd run over to the Gulf Coast out of Florida, usually Pensacola to Panama City, one of those towns up there. In the summertime, when you get near July and August, you jump into the water. The water's warm. When they talk about in the upper 80s, sometimes it actually gets into the 90s. What we actually hit is thermoclines. And in the thermocline is that you would hit that warm area, and then you go down, and then you hit a layer where now it's cold, right? And you get down to the bottom, and it gets even colder. So what's happening here is that an early storm hitting in the northern area, what that would do is that it will take the hot water and continue to turn it up and actually mix in a little bit with the water a little bit lower and cool it down just a little bit. But then it heats up again. So then what happens when the next hurricane comes in, and maybe let's say it comes in the same area a month or two later, is that the water temperature now is hotter and it stays hotter longer. Whereas when the hurricane would come in, you ever notice that a hurricane in its area, sometimes they die out a little bit before they get to shore? Well, that's because it's turning up a lot of the cooler waters, which actually takes away some of the energy. But by having an initial storm this earlier, turning up the waters, it brings the hot level of water down lower than it normally would be. So if perhaps there comes another storm later in the year, moves through, as the early winds begin to move through and turns up the water, it doesn't cool down enough. It stays hot. So instead of losing energy as it gets so close to shore, it has the potential to increase energy as it comes into shore. That's something to look for, especially on something like this. It has, in other words, it has the potential to pave the way for major disaster later if it's not protected or if it comes into that area. So I wanted to bring that to your attention and for your prayers, because as I was looking at this, I said, look at this thing, the very first thing, first time in 167 years, and originally yesterday they had it pointed like it would probably come to New Orleans. It said, coming right here where we're trying to do God's work. And so I wanted to ask for your prayers that God helps continue to protect this area for what's going on. So anyway, I just want to bring that to your attention as we talk about the weather. And by the way, we need to talk about the weather as things are going on, because the world's going to be talking about climate change as far as man is not listening to the left, where actually the problems are being developed is because man is not listening to God. And that's what we need to continue to bring out. All right, so now let's move on. Let's get into the first focus, all right? This is the main focus I want to talk about today. And this has a lot to do with our future and potentially biblical fulfillment, all right? The EU Commission is calling for a European superstate. I don't have a great deal of information, but I needed to bring out just a couple pieces of information to bring it to your attention, because it ties into what you're looking right here is Daniel's vision finally developing. Whereas the church has known and taught for many, many years that Europe would develop into a united, as we have like a United States of America, they would have a United States of Europe. Well, now we have a new president coming in who's actually looking to do that very thing. And it ties into the prophecy of Daniel. Now, the church has taught that from the early years were worldwide, Mr. Herbert Armstrong, when there was no way that anybody dreamed that it would ever be possible, and that it would be headed up under Germany one more time, which everybody thought was ludicrous. But that's exactly what has taken place over the last few decades. And now the new EU president coming in is a German. All right, again, let's talk about that. All right, here we have the new president of the European Commission. The incoming German defense minister, Ursula von der Leyen, all right, nominated to be the next president of the European Commission, has called for the creation of a European superstate. The problem that they're facing now is because of the president and his administration and many of the tariffs that he's placing on is hurting Europe. So now they're trying to find a way that they can push back to protect themselves. And what's going on is you're seeing now a fulfillment. You know, what God has done in the past, he's shown us from Israel, from the Assyria, and also with Judah and Babylon, is what God does is he uses our enemies, right? He uses our enemies to bring about the demise when a nation has turned its back on God. So what we're looking at here through many of the administration with the president who's trying to make us great again, that many of the policies are doing nothing more than inflating anger to many of the nations around the country and around the world, and God will use these to bring about punishment on this nation. This is one of them. So here's one of the things that she said from the beginning. My aim is a United States of Europe. This is her aim. Look right here. My aim is the United States of Europe on the model of the federal states such as Switzerland, Germany, or the United States. So what she's trying to do is pull everyone together, where there be no borders, there'll be just one union of everybody who's going to be controlling the rest of the world. They will run into problems. When you look at a federation like Switzerland, Germany, or United States, that's all one country. What they're trying to do is pull many countries together, give away their sovereignty, all work together as one country. According to Daniel, this shows that they're going to be the 10 kings who's going to have power for a little while, but they hadn't been given the kingship yet. To make this work, they're going to have to bring in someone which is going to be a man of sin with a religious background. We're looking at the Holy Roman Church to make all this thing finally work, because they won't be able to do it on their own. She went on to say, she's also called for the creation of a European army. All right, there has to be a European army of all the countries, because another thing that Daniel talks about is a king of the north and a king of the south. And they talk about the king of the south pushing against the king of the north, and the king of the north is going to overpower the king of the south. So that shows that it's going to have a military might and military strength. Right now, Germany is the one who's putting all of this together to have this strong military power that they can be able to protect themselves with the rest of the world. Now, one more thing I want to bring out with this. The new rep of Foreign Affairs and Security, tying in the alliance of Europe, that many people in Europe today are still aligned to what would become the king of the South. And that means many of the Muslim people and their faith. So this is what this new Foreign Affairs Security representative is going to be. Spanish Foreign Minister Josep Borrell, nominated to replace Federica Mogherini as High Representative for the Union of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, as a well-known supporter of the mullahs in Iran. So how in the world are you going to pull together a federation like the United States if you're in support of the mullahs, who are a dictator controlling ruling power of religious base? See, it won't work. That's why they're going to need to have a man come in who's going to have the power and the charisma to be able to move and to shake the rest of the world to put all this together. So that's what we're looking at right now. Borrell has also said that he hopes that Britain will leave the EU, which we believe will eventually happen also, that they will no longer be a part. Because he said that's an impediment to the creation of a European superstate. And it is an impediment because the mindset of the Israelite people is not the same as those who are non-Israelite, like Germany. They are more warlike, where the people of the United States, Great Britain, and many of the lost tribe nations are more of a peace type people. So you're looking at all that, but what you're looking at now is you're looking at the actual development. You have, I don't know, Danny, one of our techs here can give us more than me, is over 26 nations who are still a part of that. Eventually what's going to come down is to 10 who will have the power to make the decisions or the control. Even if there's more involved, there'll only be 10, according to the scriptures, who actually have the voting power or the control to be able to run this super state that they're trying to put together right now. That is the bottom of the toes of the beast of Daniel that we looked at from Nebuchadnezzar that he talked about. So now let's take that and put this perspective into biblical terms for the EU and Daniel's prophecy. Nebuchadnezzar's dream. I only take a part of this because as I was doing this, I said, well, you know what, we need to spend some time here. We need to start working into this area, and probably after the feast when we have more time, because there's a lot of things taking precedence before the feast. We probably ought to get into some of this, and we can sit down with Danny Ellis here, who's a deacon here in New Orleans, who studies Europe a lot and has studied for decades and kept on top of things. And we can sit down and put together some really tight programs with a lot of information talking about this that people are just not familiar with in this world. So now let's take a look at this, Daniel's dream and what is taking place. Eventually it gets to a beast that has the 10 toes, all right, and it starts with the head, and I'm going to explain all that now. Daniel explained, this is in verses 41 through 44, where we're picking up the story. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the mixed iron with ceramic clay. And as for the toes of the feet, they're partly iron and partly clay. So shall the kingdom be partly strong and partly fragile. And as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, it will mingle it with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And that's what we talked about just a second ago when I had the headline up there showing that they're going to run into problems. Well, you don't have to be a genius to understand they're going to have problems when you look at human nature. But here we've got the Bible to tell us why they're going to have the problems. They're just not going to get along with one another. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall never be left to other people. He shall break it into pieces and shall consume all the kingdoms and shall stand forever. So what we're looking at in world events, according to Daniel, is going to come to pass. But before it sits too long, God's going to come back, he's going to smash everything, he's going to destroy it according to the dream, and then God's going to set up his kingdom, and he's going to rule on this earth for 1,000 years. That's the Bible's prophecy of what's taking place. That's what's going to take place. So now let's look a little bit into the dream. This is the dream from Daniel 2. All right, this is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So I brought up a picture now. So if they can look at this. If you go ahead and put it up, Jeff, I'm going to cover that picture. This is showing Babylon, the Medo-Persian, the Grecians, and the Romans, of course, and then it talks about many areas of the Rome. All right, this is what the Bible talks about now in relationship to these, tying Daniel 2 into Daniel 7, verse 31 of Daniel 2. And you, O king, watching, behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and his form was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold. Its chest of arms were of silver. Its belly and thighs were of bronze. And his legs of iron. His feet partly iron and partly clay. Now that's what we were reading in the verses right before this, at the beginning of the chapter. I'm sorry, right after this in verses 41 through 44. All right, this is the foundation of what we're looking at, of the size of this great image. It says, and while you watched, a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on his feet and clay and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, and the silver, and the gold were all crushed together. They became like chaff in the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, that so no trace was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So what we're looking at here was in this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, that Daniel interpreted in the vision of Daniel, is that it was showing God showing the great powers that would take place from Nebuchadnezzar's time all the way through to the return of Jesus Christ. That's what we were looking at with the powers of what was taking place. When it got down to Rome, of course, you would see from Revelation that they would rise up and fall several times before the return of Jesus Christ. But ultimately, Jesus Christ is going to come. He's the stone that was cut without hands, and is going to destroy it all, and he's going to rebuild and replenish the earth, and he will be the great mountain that we're talking about. So now, this is going to be, you're going to like this. This is really cool. I just found that, and I was talking to one of the ministers who is in charge of this project, and let me tell you, they're Seventh-day Adventists, but there were people, or a group of people who came together to try to do a work as far as they see it. But part of what they're doing is in this project. So I wanted to share this with you because I got permission from them to be able to share this information. And I got a great video put together for you. They call it the Daniel 2 Project. The goal here is to take an image of the Nebuchadnezzar image, and they built this huge image. They actually carved it out of a tree. I'm going to show you how they're doing it. And they're taking it around the country now to try to get people aware of what's going on, that we're near the end time as far as what they're. I know we have different beliefs, but at least in this project, it's somewhat biblical. And they do believe that 10 toes is Europe, just as we do. So with that, I'm going to show you now what we're talking about. Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So here we have the first picture. You see the man taking this giant tree that they had got cut down, and they're carving it out. And here's a non-finished product, but this is in stages. And eventually, they actually brought it to now. Las Vegas was their starting city to bring it to. That's the actual, that's a tree. This is one tree that they cut down. A tree was cut from 127-foot redwood out of California. Now, they were very clear to let me know that the tree was not a healthy tree. They had to remove the tree. It was coming down. So they got permission to either, I don't know if they bought it or was donated to them. I don't know how they got it. But it was a 127-foot tree, and they counted the rings. It was actually 127 years old. And the section they cut out to use was 36 feet. So you got the actual wood of the statue, 36 feet, plus this stand that they move it on. It's a big, heavy stand, because this thing weighs tons and tons and tons. And it has to be moved with 18-wheelers and big hydraulics to be able to lay it down and to move it. And so that's what you're looking at there. So this is the man, while they were carving it on they put a cover around it. I'm going to show you the video. It was actually a 10-minute video that I put together out of many videos that they had, to run a 10-minute video to show you the process, because I said, this is really cool. We need to show this to our members. So what it's all about, it says this is a chainsaw carved image. It's over 36 feet tall, carved from giant redwood tree. It says the amazing piece of art is intended to replicate the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar, the ancient Babylonian monarch, which he saw in heaven in an inspired dream. The account of this dream was recorded in chapter 2 of the Old Testament in the book of Daniel. And so the idea, I said, well, that's a pretty cool idea because, you know, when you read in the news or a news will cover that this big statue is coming to town, is that they want to bring your family and your kids to go see this. They actually, when they get there, they actually open the Bible and read them the story of Daniel and tell them how that ties into prophecy. So anyway, I said, well, that's a really cool idea for trying to get the word out. So now, I also told them that this is if you wanted more information about this project, it's here, Daniel2image.com. All right, so that you get more information and pictures if you want to do that you can go there. But we had permission, and I wanted to be able to share that with you all. So now, when we come back, we're going to be talking about Tammuz 9, all right, when we come back. So, but before we do, sit back, get the kids, take a look. We're going to be showing you a 10-minute video on the Daniel 2 project, and I'll be back in a few minutes.
That's not good.
Some kind of metal that was drove in there.
Is that what it is?
Yep.
Isn't that wild? That's, I tell you, when I saw that, I said, I got to share this with the brethren because there's no way to describe what you just saw. Now they're going to take that statue now, and they're going to go around the country, and I believe they're supposed to be going to Michigan, I believe, next, and then they're going to go to California, and who knows where it's going to go from there, but it takes an 18-wheeler and lots of equipment and manpower to be able to move that. Well, anyway, welcome back. Welcome back to the second half of our program. Let's actually get into the nuggets portion of our program now. Tammuz 9. So what is Tammuz 9, and what has that got to do with calamities? So what's Tammuz? It is the 4th month of God's calendar year. Now, we've been talking about this off and on now since 2014 and 2015, but things are tying in more and more now as we continue to move across time. All right, so now it has become, for the Jewish people, but actually they realize it or not, it's actually for all of God's people, it has become a month of disasters for Israel and for Judah. Most notable are the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem of the first and second temples. I want to clarify something first. Tammuz is the month. The first temple fell on Tammuz 9. Right? Tammuz 9 is when the first temple fell, and we got that recorded from the scripture. So Tammuz now, the second temple, the walls were breached on Tammuz 17, which has become historically more of a problem because more events have happened on Tammuz 17 than Tammuz 9. For years, for hundreds of years, the Jews would fast. Tammuz 9 was the fast day because of the fall of the temple back in the Old Testament. It happened in 2 stages. Tammuz 9 was what was called the breaching of the walls, is where the Babylonians actually got into the city, and that carried on through a few weeks till it hit the 9th of Av and the actual temple fell. So now that was a day of fasting until the second temple fell. The second temple fell with the beginning in 2 stages again. On the 17th was the breaching of the walls by the Rome, but both temples eventually fell on the 9th of Av. Those events, when they take place on the exact same day, they're significant because you see God's hand in to align these events as warnings for us to be able to look back and to see what's coming. All right, with that said now, let's take all that background information, let's look at Tammuz, when God looks at things versus the way man looks at things. Let's tie it into the prophetic information that we've been sharing now in Roaring Seas. That's a 2-part sermon. We're going to build a whole lot more, as I told you a couple months ago, on the Roaring Seas. This is one of those events taking place. So let's do a quick background on this. All right, this was the chart that we used in Roaring Seas. We brought it to the area where, I just back it up again, right here, 7 years of plenty. So what I brought out was a question: are we near or in what's called the 7 years of plenty? Because in the United States, things there's a disaster, there's a mess, but the economy continues to roar. It's roaring with income, people finding jobs. So a lot of things are taking place. In the Old Testament, when they were in Egypt, God told Joseph, through a dream again, through Pharaoh of all people, is about 7 years of plenty. Guys, he told Joseph, here's the interpretation of the dream. There's going to come 7 years of lean. So right now you have 7 years of plenty. Store away to get prepared. All right, so we're in that, what it appears to be, from all that I can find, that we may be in that period of what is declared as a 7 years of plenty. The Bible doesn't tell us 7 years of plenty in an end time, but it gives us the analogy and the duality in the old to the new. And everything falls into place. There's no reason to believe this isn't falling into place also. What follows is 7 years of lean, which brings us to a period 2030. The 2030 agenda in 2031 is what the church has basically taught about the return of Jesus Christ. All of this is aligning up. Now, I can't tell you for a fact that this is exactly what's going to take place, but you cannot deny what is aligning up to what God says He establishes kings and He removes kings. So we have in the United States, our kingship type of governance is a republic, so we have a president. All right, so presidents are put in, presidents are removed. Those are the people who's in charge. So what are we looking at? Is it the time moving close to Satan being removed following a 3.5-year period of tribulation? So here we are in 2019, all right? 2019 brings us 11 years to 2030. All right, so what are we looking at now? We're looking at 11 more years until 2030. So if we looked at way back, and I'm going to go back into this whole little section here, that one little section now becomes one minute cosmos of the whole plan of God. So if we took things and we stretched them out, what took place from 2014 to 2017, and then you put them together and then you put them on a timeline, what we were looking at now is you're looking at 3.5 years from the beginning of the blood moon tetrads, which was the 8th time this ever took place since Jesus Christ, all the way through 2017, where it appeared in 2017 that looked like Revelation, right? Revelation, talking about the signs in heaven, looked like the woman in Revelation 12. All of those events is putting together a story. God said he'll do nothing unless he reveal unto his servants first. Now, when you begin to put all this together, you can't draw conclusions. You can say, well, this is what looks like it's going to be. You cannot lock it down in stone. But this is what appears what's going on. But you can't have to deny these events are actually taking place. So now, let's take that now. Let's build on a little bit further. 2030 agenda versus the beginning of 2015, when that agenda was established. By the way, the 2030 agenda was established right here in the United States in 2015 by the Pope. As we were just mentioning with Daniel, and tying in with the toes in Rome, it's going to take some man of great authority to pull it all together. Interestingly enough, the Pope was here in America in 2015, a disastrous year for America, of many things. All right, so he introduced that here at the UN. So now, just a couple years later, the scientists have claimed we have 12 years till it's too late to save the world. All right, so when you look at that, you have the time of the Pope and the time of the scientists, all of these events all tying into the same timeline. If you would look at that timeline, this I have no way to know. So I just threw this in to say, well, what if this is the time where Satan says he knows he has but a short time? Well, we know before that there'd be a 3.5-year period of tribulation. All right, so we're looking at something that may or may not happen. But if you had a storm coming, don't you think you would prepare? And that's what God's trying to show us here. So here we have 2014, 2015 again in the blood moons. And what we're beginning to look at is the beginning of Luke 21, beginning with heavenly signs and ending with roaring seas. And we see those all taking place right now within the period of time of 2017 in the heavenly signs. And that's what we're looking at right here. What is that? 3.5 years. When you look at that, you're talking about a type of Christ. With the first coming and his second coming, his first coming, he was here on the earth in his ministry for 3.5 years. So if we looked at this, you would see the timing and the warning of the new beginning, number 8, with the blood moon tetrads being 8, bringing you to the heavenly signs. And by the way, that's the only time that NASA can find throughout all time that alignment takes place where you have Jupiter actually coming out of the area of the womb of Virgo to deliver a son, which is the type of Christ. That has happened 4 times. The 2 times of the fall of the temples that I brought out in Tammuz 9 and Tammuz 17, once at the first coming of Christ and once at picturing the second coming of Christ. Now, why is this important now? Because Joel says that these events would take place before the day of the Lord. All right, so all these events are lining up before the day of the Lord. The second 3.5 years, believe it or not, takes you to the next presidency. So what are we looking at here? Why am I bringing that out? Because if we look at this, we're talking about timelines tied into governance. That's what God and Daniel was all about, the guy who's in charge. Right? So God puts in charge who he will. All right, so now, let's look at this now, and I'm going to come back to that chart in just a second. 2 Kings 25, 1 through 4. Now it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and all his army came out and he camped against it, talking about Jerusalem, and they built a siege wall all around Jerusalem. And the siege besieged until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. The siege lasted approximately 18 months. And when you look at history, The people were dying inside those walls. They were starving to death. They were eating rats. They were unthinkable things just to try to stay alive inside the city walls. Verse 3, by the 9th day of the 4th month. Now what is that? That is Tammuz 9. On this Friday is Tammuz 9 again. It is a time of concern, a time of alarm when we look back through history. So that's why I'm bringing this out today. And that's why all of those events that we've been talking about today from Daniel, from the European, the EU, the TOEs, all the governance, all of this all points to one thing. Events that are going to happen before the return of Jesus Christ. It says, then the city was broken through and all of the men of war fled. All right, so that's the event showing you that the wall literally came down. It was breached. When you breach a wall, what does that mean? It means that the enemy now is in your camp. All your protection's over. It's just a matter of time till it falls. Keep that in mind, because I'm going to show you an event on Tammuz 9 that happened in 2015. This is very important. Here's a map, a calendar. This is what the world looked at in 2015. Here's a normal calendar, unsuspecting event of dates taking place in 2015. The blood moon tetrad we're looking at in March, right? There's the one you see in April that we're looking at, took place at the beginning of this holy days, all right? Here's an eclipse, there's the blood moon. All right, so we have that at the beginning. Now you have another eclipse in September, all the way over here, in September, right around the Feast of Tabernacles, and then you had the blood moon on the Feast of Tabernacles. So what we have here is 2 years, bookend on God's holy days, a full lunar eclipse, right? On the 2 holy days, one in the spring, one in the fall. On both years, 2014, 2015, there's only been 8 times since Christ that that's taken place. 8 is always the new beginnings. So when we were back in 2014, 2015, we could say, well, we don't exactly know what's taking place. But according to Scripture, the number 8 in the Hebrew means new beginnings. So what we felt, and we did say this is what we thought was happening, it looks like it has happened, is that God was beginning now a new chapter. A new chapter meaning the end time chapter, bringing us to the return of Jesus Christ. And it started with the blood moons in that same year. What else took place? I have a date here, June 26th and July 4th, 2 very important dates for America. So now, this is what America saw on their calendar. Unsuspecting, no idea what was going on. Why? Because they were not viewing things from God's perspective, on God's timeline, and God's calendar. All right, so you with me? All right, let's bring you forth now what takes place in this event. September 23rd pictures, all right, that pictures the beginning, all right, the beginning of the Feast of Tabernacles. So you have now, an eclipse around trumpets. You have the beginning of the Feast of Tabernacles. So you have all this now all lined up. By the way, at that time, I don't want to go into it now, that's when the Pope came to America. Went to the White House on the Day of Atonement. He went to Philadelphia. He went to the UN. Remember all those events taking place. And he laid on our doorstep the 2015 agenda, bringing us to 2030. When Satan knows he has a short time, is it possible in the White House itself that it was being laid out, the time frame that Satan knows he has a short time to be able to bring this nation down? One thing we know for sure is God will not be in the same room with evil. So if the Pope was here and in the White House, God couldn't be. All of this took place in 2015. Now, June and July 2015. Now let's look at those same 2 dates on a smaller calendar in God's perspective. Tammuz 17 was July 4th. July 4th, 2017. I'm sorry, July 4th, 2015 was Tammuz 17. When America was established, all right, mark this down. When America was established, July 4th, 1776, was Tammuz 17. I went back this week just to make sure I had my figures right. I went through every single year from that date, Tammuz 17, July 4th, all the way back to 1776. And that's the 8th time that this has happened since that date. The 8th time this took place since 1776. That also says new beginnings. Why would this be a new beginning on our building of the establishment of this country? It's because of this. June 26, 2015, which was Tammuz 9. What we're looking at from God's calendar, and if you didn't get chills when you see this, then you're not paying attention. Because here we have Tammuz 9, picturing the breaching of the walls of this nation. That means evil, sin. And you can look at the time for same-sex marriage approval to what we have now just 4 years later, and you could never have imagined the transgender, the trans this, the trans that, the identities of all these different things going on. No way to imagine that we would take our children and bring them to a transgender or these I don't even want to, what's that? Drag queen, that's the word I'm looking for. Drag queen meetings at libraries and luncheons and brunches and bringing your children. And now they got the kids jumping all over the drag queens and playing and having a great time with them. Unbelievable how fast this was. So what you're looking at is the breaching of the wall of all society, of right and wrong. And what happened just a few days after that? The warning of our founding on that day came to roost. And on that day, and I went back, and it's only going to happen one more time that I can record. I went all the way through to 2034 that'll take place on July 4th. If that's significant, I don't know, but I wanted to bring all of that out. Same-sex marriage was decided in our nation on that particular day. Nebuchadnezzar's troops breached the walls in the old Jerusalem and entered the city. 4 weeks later, the Holy Temple was destroyed. So it's just a matter of time before this nation is destroyed, as we're looking at the parallels between God's calendar. So now let's begin to wrap this up here. All right, so here we have now 2024, 2025. The Minsky moment, we talk about that more down the road again. All right, so they have the 24 election, and you have a very short time. So you have time for preparation for 7 years of. Isn't it amazing how this takes place? The Minsky moment, that means that all our debt now that we have to make more debt just to pay our interest. Nothing will go to anything else but the interest from that time on. And then it makes less and less payments, even on the interest. That means that debt will escalate very rapidly. So if it works out the way it is, believe it or not, it's not a prediction, but it looks like it could be, President Trump will get in one more time. Eventually, the left will then get in. It will begin move to the 2030 agenda, allowing the UN to be able to help run the United States and ushering in the rule of the Pope and the continual fall of this nation. You would then hit your 7 years of lean. I didn't make these dates up, and I didn't put these alignments together. They were set up in God's heavens eons ago. But that's the events that's all lining up. So what are we looking at? A long-term, short-term preparation. July 4th, 2025. When the next president is in office, July 4th, 2025, at sunset on July 4th, is the next breaching of our walls. That's what you're looking at. What will breach there? Our government, our control, and turning over everything to a green world, which is impossible to accomplish. That's what we're looking at in these alignments. Now, on the chart, what are we looking at? Several events are lining up that should bring us all into an awareness. The roaring seas in Luke 21. The bringing in of potential economic collapse beginning with the U.S. world, which will shortly follow. 2024, the possibility of the duality of the 7 years of lean. And then you have a biblical alignment of Tammuz 9 pointing to a spiritual disaster taking place from that time forward. And then there are at least 2 more events I haven't talked about yet. 2 more events that's going to be coming. One of them is found in the Bible, has a significant potential of a biblical fulfillment of an end-time Ephraim in 2024. You're going to stay tuned for that because that's going to be very important when we get into that program next. All right, that's it for our program. As always, I ran a little bit over, not too long, not too much longer. July 12th, Tammuz 9. So what do we have? DVDs in the mail last week, might have been the week before last, but last week, Roaring Seas went out, and News Nuggets and Insights, our July 4th special. Then from the web office, they have 16 new DVDs that's been posted to the YouTube channel. So you want to be sure to go online and take a look at those. And we have a guest speaker coming to New Orleans this week, Mr. Chuck Hunt out of Jackson, Michigan congregation. He and his family will be here, and he's going to be delivering the sermon tomorrow. So if you don't have services to go to and you're looking for something to watch, tune in live. We'll be live streaming Chuck Hunt right here out of New Orleans. Well, there you have it. That's our program for today. As always, a lot of information. I hope you found it useful and helpful and insightful. So now, as we always do each week, we want to close our program with a new video. And this one is Overcoming Anxiety as a Christian. Take a look at this video, and we'll be right back to close our program.
Did you know that anxiety can come from simply having the wrong expectations? Well, if that's true, then what are the right expectations? Here's a simple answer: God's expectations. Okay, then what are God's expectations? Here's another simple answer: perfection. So how do you arrive at perfection? You can't. The good news is that Jesus Christ offered you his own perfection on the cross. Romans 5:1 says, "Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ." So how does that help us deal with anxiety? Once you have peace with God, you get to have peace about everything else. Why? Because of promises like the one found in Isaiah 51:12, where God says, "I, even I, am he who comforts you." Who are you that you are afraid of man who dies and of the Son of Man who is made like grass? Why is peace with God so great? Because no matter what is causing your anxiety, when you have peace with God, he is your comforter. He is your solution. You need money? He's your provider. You need energy? He's your strength. You need healing? He is your healer. You're looking for direction? He is your counselor. Then how do we receive these things from God? When we have peace with God, the Holy Spirit is able to dwell in us, and he transforms our hearts. He gives us hearts that are seeking after God and his ways. And when we follow the ways of the Lord, we're going to have the perspective of the Lord as well. I want you to think about something for a second. What if the disciples started writing the accounts of Jesus being on earth before Jesus was resurrected? What if they sat down the day after Jesus' death and started writing the Gospels? It would have been a depressing story. The story would have been told from man's limited perspective. They were scared and they were disappointed. They thought that God had made a mistake, that maybe God didn't see it coming. But God had the better perspective and the bigger picture in mind: life and redemption. Some of us are trying to write the story of our lives, but we haven't gotten a hold of God's point of view yet. We're not looking at things from his perspective. We've yet to understand his plan, his sovereignty, and his power. God has a bigger picture in mind for your life. If you're dealing with anxiety that's based on your perspective, you can start to look at things from his perspective today. How do we learn to see things from the point of view of other people in our lives? It's easy. We spend time with them and we get to know them more. The same way, we learn to view life from God's perspective by spending time with God. We get it straight from Jesus. And that is why it's so critical for us as believers to spend time with him. We have peace with God when we accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior, but we experience the peace of God in our lives and situations when we abide in him, walking in his presence. John 14:27 says, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Do not let your heart be troubled, nor let it be fearful."
Well, welcome back. It takes a lot of time to find videos every week, and I want to thank Audrey. She was able to get in touch with Troy Black or his group to be able to give us permission to use his videos. So we're hoping to be able to open up more videos as time goes on down the road. So nice job. Thank you, Audrey, for being able to do that. That's our program. Well, I hope you enjoyed it today. And as always, every week as we close, we want to thank all of you who watch the program, who support us, and even financially support to keep this program going. We send out a lot of information, a lot of tapes, DVDs. You know, we mail out almost 45,000 DVDs a year, thanks to you. Thank you for the help to be able to do that. And we want to continue to expand the program to be able to do God's work. And remember, as we close the program, tell all your friends about our program. They're going to love you for it. Or not. Till next week, God be with you.